All right, so right to left, implementing agile strategies that deliver business outcomes. Lots of great words there for the bingo card. So what does all of that mean? So I will skip over my bio and stuff. Bill has already introduced me, but also if you go to agendashift.com/keynotes, all the references for this talk you will find there, and some other goodies as well. You can get a PDF of the slides as well. What we're focusing on, although it includes material from the other two books, is From Right to Left, as the title implies. Right to Left, the Digital Leader's Guide to Lean and Agile. And what I'm trying to do with Right to Left is to present Agile and Lean Agile as a completely different paradigm to the one, so not only to the one that it replaces, but also to the kind of Agile that, unfortunately, too many organizations are struggling to implement. So Right to Left gives you a new way of understanding Agile, a new way of understanding Lean Agile, and I hope it will make you more successful with it. So the kind of issues we'll be dealing with, these may feel familiar to you. Monolithic solutions that aren't working for people. When I say monolithic solutions, we might be talking big technical systems, big products. We might be talking more organizational things, governance structures, process frameworks, whatever it might be. Mediocre solutions that aren't measuring up. Solutions that just aren't delighting the customer, aren't delighting the organization. It's a mediocre process for the people actually doing the work. Mediocre process, delivering mediocre solutions. Rollouts losing sight of what's important. I'm sure you've been in a kind of situation where you forget why we're doing this. We're doing this project almost for its own sake now. The rollout process is becoming more important than whatever it was we were trying to achieve at the beginning of the project. And the same mistakes repeated, the same causes blamed. The lessons learned document looks the same from project to project. There's no real deep organizational learning actually happening. So I was asked a couple of weeks ago by Bill to talk on Right to Left. And to my surprise, I found that I've actually not done Right to Left as a talk for a good couple of years. So I thought it'd be a good opportunity to bring this up to date with all that I've been doing recently on leading with outcomes. I've drawn this new picture, especially for this talk. So we are, for every scope and scale, developing strategy together, pursuing strategy together, outcomes before solutions, agreement on outcomes before solutions, working backwards from key moments of impact and learning. And especially for today, that last phrase, working backwards from key moments of impact and learning. And that is what Right to Left is all about. It's what connects that pursuit of strategy and the development of strategy. So we're going to talk a bit about what right to left actually means, why it's called Right to Left, the origin of the term, of the metaphor. And then we'll hop over to the right. We'll start on the right and work backwards. Start on the right on pursuing strategy together, testing the strategy, feedback and learning. And then we'll move leftwards, developing strategy together. And two patterns for those two sides. Pattern on the right, meaning, measure, and method. And the other pattern, ideal, obstacles, outcomes. Two easy patterns to certainly to remember. And they're good patterns to get skillful in as well. So enough introduction. What is Right to Left? Now I'm going to use Lego to explain what Right to Left is all about. If you can explain it with Lego, that's always better. So first of all, if you had to explain Lego itself, where would you start? If you had to explain Lego, where would you start? Would you start on the left with the inputs to the process, those lorry loads, those truckloads of plastic granules arriving at the Lego factory? Or would you start with children playing with the finished product? So from the left with plastic granules arriving at the factory, or from the right with children playing with the finished product, left to right or right to left. Now, I won't insult you by asking you what the answer to that question. I'm sure most of you will want to answer right to left, but we're going to use that same idea, that same metaphor, and it's a process metaphor for other things. So what is your kind of agile? If you had to explain your kind of agile, where would you start? Would you start with backlog items in Jira? Other tracking tools are available. Or people collaborating over working software that is already beginning to meet needs. So backlog items in Jira, working forwards, or working software, people collaborating, meeting needs, all of that, and working backwards, left to right or right to left. If we're all together in a conference hall, and I'd be asking for a show of hands on who would choose left to right or right to left, people would be voting for right to left. I always get that answer. And yet, when I did my research for the book, I found that most, if not, the vast majority of descriptions of agile were much more like that first one, that left to right one, than that right to left one. And that was even more so when I asked people to describe Scrum. So do you describe Scrum as 2 levels of backlog, the planning events and everything else that takes things from backlog to backlog and into the development process? Or do you describe Scrum as shared objectives, pursued goal by goal, and iterative process? Both of those definitions 100% compatible with the Scrum guide. Which better describes Scrum as a paradigm change from what it replaces? So left to right, starting with backlogs, or right to left, shared objectives pursued goal by goal. We can ask that same question scaling up to your kind of safe, and other scaled agile frameworks are available. Do you describe it as N levels of backlog and all the events that take the work through the different stages of the process? Or again, describe it as shared objectives pursued goal by goal. So that's a scaled agile delivery process. And we can do the same with transformation process. The left side looks a bit different. The right side looks exactly the same. So the left side, this will be very familiar. It's a caricature, but it works because it is so familiar, so depressingly familiar. Choose a solution, sell the solution, roll the solution out, live with the consequences. Or shared objectives pursued goal by goal. And that's a flavor of right to left, not a definition of right to left. For the definition, right to left is working backwards from key moments of impact and learning, working backwards from done and really done. Now, I'm going to annoy a few people by putting forward a slightly controversial definition of done. Most people get the joke. A few people are upset by it. But my definition of done, and I would argue the only definition of done you will ever need, someone's need was met. So we're working backwards from someone's need was met. So that is done, and really done. We've accounted deeply for the learning. We've looked back at the decisions that we made, the assumptions that we made. And if it turned out we made a wrong decision or wrong assumption, then we go back and change something, change the strategy, change the process. So that's what right to left means. The origin of the name right to left is from a practice from Kanban. Remember my first book, Kanban from the Inside, is about Kanban. Now, you don't have to be using Kanban to practice right to left. And I'll give a little example of that in a moment. But the practice in Kanban is to review your board right to left. You start with work closest to completion first. So what can we get over the line? What about this work that's like properly in progress? How do we get it closer to being ready to deploy? And working backwards, do we start a new piece of work, or perhaps better, do we resolve whatever's the blocker on this piece of work. So starting from the right, we work closest to completion and working backwards. We can take that a bit further. Working backwards from done. Is it actually really done? Is it clear? Do we know how? Do we know that we have actually met someone's need? What is the proof that we have met somebody's need? And is this work staying done? Is it stable? Is it, good from a quality point of view now that it's actually in the hands of the customer? Is the customer delighted by it? And we can work backwards. So for this work that we're about to deliver, how confident are we that it's going to meet someone's need? And we can ask similar questions as we work further backwards. The questions begin to change slightly. But what is the need we're about to meet? How will we know that we're going to meet that need? What are the assumptions that we are making in our decisions to prioritize this piece of work and in the design of it? And all of that kind of thinking highlights some key moments. There's the moment when something goes to done, where we're confident we know what the need was, we're confident in our solution, we're confident actually that the customer's need has been met, the user need has been met, they're delighted with whatever it is that we've delivered. Knowing also that we're going to need to account for that. And we know when we're going to account for that. And at the beginning, as something moves into being worked on, it transitions from being just in the backlog to being something that we are working on. We are having those conversations, making sure we have a shared understanding of the need that we're meeting, how we're going to meet it, how we know that we're going to meet it. And what you're doing is creating some boundaries around the process. You're making this process, to use the technical jargon from organizational psychology, you're creating a container for learning. These boundaries around the process, working backwards from done and really done, actually changes how people interact with the work, how they regard the work, the questions they ask each other about the work, and so on. And at the end of the process, the work stays on the board until we're ready to account for the learning, and everything is in scope. How we coordinated, how we met needs, how we agreed to work with each other, how we approached each piece of work, any other aspect of our process, and in all of the above, the assumptions that we made. And if any of our assumptions prove to be wrong, then we need to change something. Our understanding of the customer has changed, our understanding of our process has changed, our understanding of our organization has changed, and we need to change our strategies or our ways of working or our process accordingly. And when you're working on improving, when you're reviewing progress on your strategy, for all these kinds of things where it really helps to have regular reviews of your progress and your performance, review right to left. If there's any productivity tip I can give you today, is see if you can make your review meetings more right to left. Starting with the things closest to completion and working backwards. Starting with things that you have completed and have learned from and working backwards. And if there are enough people in the room that you need to give updates in groups, give those updates in customer first or outside in order too. So outside in first, the people who best understand the customer going first, you're putting their needs first, you're putting their satisfaction first, and then work inwards. And then for every update, that right to left protocol. Start with what good looks like, what done looks like, objectives, measures of success, and then the work itself, most complete first. You don't need a Kanban board in order to run a meeting with a right to left protocol. I sometimes joke, if I had a time machine, I would go back, how many years now? 20 years, this is scary. I would go back 20 years and turn my reports upside down. I remember when the first time I was a manager of managers, and we had some reports from our tracking system, and they always started with the backlog and finished with the work that we completed. And by starting with the work in the backlog, I was like, push, push, push. When are we starting this? When are we starting this? And it would be so much better if we'd started with, well, what are we learning? How's this going? How do we get this stuff over the line? What other issues have we got with the work that's in progress? And only worry about starting new work when we know that we've got the capacity to do it. So that is right to left, a Kanban-inspired name, a lean-inspired approach, and we're working backwards from those key moments of impact and learning. Now, for our box on the right, we've already covered enough of feedback and learning, certainly enough for our purposes today. We're going to look now at this box as a whole, pursuing strategy together. And we are testing the strategy, experiment by experiment, if you like, idea by idea, if you like. And a great pattern for generating ideas that align to your strategy that you can test is this pattern: meaning, measure, method. So it's an outcome-oriented innovation pattern: meaning, measure, method. Meaning, focusing on what's important, focusing on the part of the strategy you need to be focusing on. Measure, so how will you know that you are winning? And method, that's the new ideas and how you're going to test them. Now, you can think of this pattern as two things. You can think of it as a couple of warnings or a couple of principles, and as a generative pattern, a way of generating ideas that you actually want to act on. So the couple of warnings, or the principle first. The first principle: meaning before measure. Now, I'm always concerned when certain practitioners always want to lead with a particular metric, whether it's lead time, customer satisfaction, or velocity, or flow efficiency, whatever it might be. They are seem to be just interested in one metric. And I get increasingly worried the longer it goes before they start taking an interest in what it is we are trying actually to achieve. Or the longer they go before they're taking interest in our purpose and our goals and so on. So when I see people focusing too much on the measure, I always want to step back to those kinds of things, focusing in on what's important. Now, warning number two, or principle number two, so we've had meaning before measure. The other principle is measure before method. And what we're warning against is choosing the solution and then choosing your success metrics afterwards. That is cheating. That is a way to implement a solution that doesn't actually align with your strategy. And if you go through this process, you're much more likely to come up with solutions that do actually align with your strategy, actually do deliver what it is you actually set out to achieve, what you actually wanted, what your organization wants. Then, so that's the pattern as warnings, as principles. Now, as a generative pattern, a generative process, you can think of these as a string of exercises in a workshop, or you can think of these as a leadership routine. Just certain questions you learn to ask in a certain kind of order, as part of your daily rhythms of work. We're going to think of this as an innovation pattern. And I'm going to invite you to actually try it with me. I want you to think about your strategy, what it is you are trying to achieve, and what in particular it is that you need to achieve next. And let's make that meaningful. So identify that thing in your backlog, in your strategy, that thing you really want to achieve next. And let's focus on what's important. When that's working at its ideal best for everyone, what's that like? I'm not designing anything. I'm just asking the question, what's that like when it's working at its ideal best for everyone? Whose needs would we be meeting? What new stories could they tell? Let's think about that just for a moment. Working at its ideal best for everyone. Whose needs? What new stories? And then we can ask, well, what stops that? What gets in the way? Why is that important? So we're digging into the meaning of the situation. What are the struggles that people need to overcome? And then we can move on to measuring that. How will we know that we're winning? How will we know that something good is beginning to happen. We've got some signs of emergence, signs, maybe just tiniest signs that something interesting might be happening. Indicators of real progress towards our goals, real signs that we are actually helping people overcome their struggles. And then measures of success, how when looking backwards, we can say, yes, we definitely done it. And beyond those goals and aspirations, what we're doing is going deeper and deeper into the landscape of outcomes. How will we know that we're winning? Meaning, measure. And you've got your measures, then method. And we can, with all of that stuff we've got in the air now, you know, what it's like when it's working at its ideal best for us. Those stories that are of overcoming struggle for people, those various levels of measure, signs of emergence, indicators of progress, and so on, measures of success, and so on. We can now think about different ways of realizing those. And we can aim to generate several of those, several solutions. We can aim to generate diverse solutions. And we're moving away from the monolith towards a set of things that we can try. We can frame them as experiments. We can guarantee that succeed or fail, we are going to learn something from implementing those things, not making a big bet on something enormous and seeing a whole project succeed or fail, but something that we can try. So that's meaning, measure, method, part of testing the strategy. As long as we've got the feedback and learning in place, that's how we pursue strategy, how we develop strategy, and that's hand in hand with that pursuit. And the pattern here, it's called the I-Do pattern. That stands for ideal, obstacles, outcomes. And again, it's got kind of wrapped in or bracketed in a couple of other things. So establish context first. So what is the scope of this, for example? I don't mean that so much in terms of project scope, but kind of the intersection between our organizational scope and the situation that we find ourselves in. What do we need to know before we have this conversation? That's what I mean by establishing context. You know what it's like when you don't have context. The conversation feels difficult. You don't quite know who's here and why we're here, who I represent, what I represent, those kinds of things. Get that context in place first. Then it's ideal, obstacles, outcomes. And again, we're generating lots of things, getting lots of things into the air that we can then organize into a strategy where we've got some clear goals, we've got some places to start, we've got some intermediate things, and we've got some hypotheses about what will lead to what. So we're going to focus in on the I-Do pattern, ideal, obstacles, outcomes, and it's going to sound quite familiar, actually. The I-Do pattern is actually like it's kind of the core pattern of leading with outcomes. And what you've seen already, meaning, measure, method, actually builds on it. So the I-Do pattern goes like this: ideal, obstacles, outcomes. Ideal, envision a compelling future. Obstacles, identify what's in the way of what we want. And outcomes, look beyond to what's better. And again, I'm going to invite you to try it. Not with your existing strategy. That would be, well, it's doable, but we're not. It would be hard for me to facilitate that from here. We're going to go back to near the beginning with what might be your kind of agile. It's got a question mark against it, but what is certainly my kind of agile. People collaborating over the rapid evolution of working software that is already beginning to meet needs. So we can ask to the ideal part, you know, what's that like? Even just those 3 words might be enough to trigger an interesting conversation. What's that like? What's that like when it's working at its ideal best for everyone? As we heard before, whose needs would we be meeting when it's working at that ideal best? What new stories could they tell? Stories that currently involve struggle, stories that when we get this right will involve happy endings. And then obstacles, what stops that? What gets in the way? And why is that important? And then outcomes. What would you like to have happen? Classic coaching question. What would you like to have happen? And if we start small, we can ask, then what happens, then what happens, then what happens, multiple times. Once again, signs of emergence, indicators of progress, measures of success, goals, aspirations, even values can flow out of conversations like this. Now, there are more questions we could ask. This can be a much more elaborate thing, but that's the basic structure: ideal, obstacles, outcomes. People collaborating over the rapid evolution of working software that is already beginning to meet needs. That's my right to left definition of agile, if you like. Ideal, best, ideal, obstacles, outcomes. You can try that for yourself. If you haven't tried that for yourself already, you can try that after this talk has finished. So that is on the left-hand side, ideal, obstacles, outcomes, bracketed by establishing context and organizing the strategy. And that is what feeds the process, but we're always looking to testing it. We're always looking to feedback and learning. We're always working right to left. So that was right to left, implementing agile strategies that deliver real business outcomes, working backwards from those key moments of impact and learning. Now, if you've been affected by any of the issues raised in this program, English spelling there, apologies, monolithic solutions that aren't working for people, mediocre solutions that aren't measuring up, rollouts losing sight of what's important, the same mistakes repeated, the same causes blamed. If you're affected by any of those, go to that link I mentioned, agendashift.com/keynotes. You can get a PDF of the slides. They're there now. You can get some references, also links to some events, some of them free, some of them not. Related to what we've talked about today, some assessment tools and some other free resources, and the Leading with Outcomes modules and the Facilitator and Trainer program. So just quickly, what Leading with Outcomes is about. So in Foundation, you are learning those patterns. Meaning, measure, method are the I do pattern, right to left. And you're learning them in a context that is all about leadership. And then in the next two modules, inside out strategy and outside in strategy, you are applying them to real strategy challenges. So inside out strategy, that's strategy that starts on the inside of your organization and works out, starts with your experience, your capabilities, and you're thinking about, well, what's the impact that we could make as we develop ourselves. Outside in strategy is strategy that starts with your customers, your suppliers, your competitors, and so on, and you work through the implications to the inside. They are not antagonistic to each other, those two approaches. They are complementary to each other. Get them both right, they feed off each other. Adaptive organization, that is like the deep magic of organization or organizing, what all organizing is all about. And we make extensive use, again, of these patterns. We're presenting some theory, but we're applying it using the kinds of exercises that you saw in this talk today. On top of that, train the trainer, as a trainer or a facilitator, you can access all the materials, workshop facilitation materials, training materials, and so on. That's enough about those. agendashift.com/keynotes. I'll be very happy now to take questions. Thank you very much for listening. I can find the stop share button.
All right. Thank you very much, Mike. We don't have any questions right now from the audience, and I'm going to imagine that probably they're just not entering questions. So, hey, that's a very, very, very good outcome that I came up with. So I do have questions as a project manager, and I believe that perhaps most of our attendees are experiencing that. As a project manager, we are either in the middle of a project's already been established.
Yep.
and we have all the, the basis for the reason the project got started, et cetera, et cetera. And stakeholders have changed because they left. You got a new one here. And we are deep into process.
You're setting up like the perfect scenario, aren't you? Yes.
Yeah, you bet. Well, it's real life as a project manager.
Yeah.
And we're deep into corporate set methods and frameworks, be it safe for much larger organizations, and that's that, or total habit Scrum. We're seeing more Kanban being brought in, and then Scrumban, et cetera. And how would you approach as a coach? How would you approach me as a project manager as to how can I get this thing going?
Yeah. Well, that's a really good question. The actually quite, I think, reassuring answer is that you can start almost anywhere on that picture. And you can start where you think there will be the most leverage, where it will have the most impact. And if you're working with something that's already running, very often the thing that will give you the most impact is to focus on the feedback and learning. And that tends to take place, as I kind of illustrated in the talk, that tends to take place at two kinds of levels. So there's the conversations you have every day about the day-to-day of the work, steering your way towards done for a piece of work. And then there's those occasions where you step back from the work and you think about how it's going. Are we moving in the right direction? Are we making good decisions? Are we choosing the right pieces of work? Are we choosing them in the right order? Are they having the impact that we want them to have? And so on. And sort of flex those learning muscles in the team for the scope of the project, and make sure that is well represented in however you govern your projects, and bring some of that thinking into your governance of projects as well. Get some of that, for example, if you have a governance meeting where you're going through your to-do list just in the order that those issues were raised, which is very common for meetings, could you try resequencing your list of issues so that they are in closest to completion first? And you actually start with celebrating your wins. You start with looking at your measures of success, your goals, and so on, and you are kind of working backwards and focusing on the things that are going to have the most immediate impact towards what you are trying to achieve. There's a picture in my first book, and there's a chart, and it sort of does that. There's a chart of how quickly are we getting to our issues, how quickly are we resolving our issues. And there's a very obvious intervention where suddenly we were getting through them very quickly. Issues, instead of languishing for weeks or months, we're getting resolved very, very quickly, because we were really, really strict about how we sequenced our conversations, so that we really focused on the things that we could impact, not have the same conversations about the same items week after week after week, which is so tedious to sit through. It's such a waste of time and so unproductive in terms of actually getting things done. So yeah, if you want me to recommend one place to start, particularly for things that are already up and running,
yes,
it will be on the feedback and learning at multiple levels, at least two levels: the day-to-day, and when you step back to look. But also you can go higher to your sort of more sort of governance type meetings as well. Yeah.
That's very good. Thank you. That's really an ideal situation. I think we all, as project managers, face regularly. I mean, we have definitely enough data out there, whether it's burn down charts or anything else that we're using.
I just want to add, I'm very careful. I've been very careful from the earliest days of Agenda Ship, going back to 2015. And despite the fact I have a name with a book with the word Kanban in the title, everything I've just described is 100% compatible with Scrum. In terms of how you do your day-to-day feedback, that's your stand-up meeting, your daily Scrum. in terms of how you review and retrospect in Scrum as well. I've said nothing that contradicts anything that is well established in Scrum, and it scales up as well. It scales up when you're talking at sort of portfolio meetings or other kinds of governance meetings as well. You can do it right to left. Start with what you're trying to achieve, your measures of success, and then work backwards through your work as if nothing else, as a productivity tip.
Absolutely.
It helps. Yes, yes. I mean, it's
That's
kind of it's channeling lean as well. You know, it's not all of lean, but it's channeling a technique that helps to improve flow. There's some long established knowledge feeding into that practice. Yeah.
That's very good. Thank you. I do see one question here. I think you touched on it in just right now, but it's worth definitely bringing up out there. Hey, Mike, what do you do when one of the teammates that say, "Hey, I just got to get stuff done"?
Yeah. Well, I tend to work at team level and above. It's not part of my job really to coach individual team members. And what I concentrate on is the team's own decision-making capacity. There's a great, you know, the OODA loop, John Boyd made a really good definition of what I think of as a team that's viable, that's got autonomy, and it's increasing its capacity for independent action. That's a really good way of thinking about teams that can make decisions for themselves. And I would make sure that the team as a whole, including that person, is as involved as they possibly can be in the decisions that the teams are making, that the team or teams at every level, every scope, every scale, you are bringing together the decision making, the strategizing, and the doing. I think that's crucial. And it may be that person just really does have, you know, stuff that they have to get through, you know, and you have to start by respecting that. You know, I never start by assuming that people are doing it all wrong. You want to find out what is the capacity of the system, what are the goals of the team, of the people, of the teams. What kind of relationships do people have with the team, with its work, with its workload, with its working practices, all those kinds of things. We're kind of getting into we're getting into some of that deep magic of organization now, but yeah, it's all about relationships. It's actually all about relationships.
It is.
And you give people, it's such a cliche to say you create the environment in which people can do these things, but the way you create environments actually, you know, healthy environments, is by looking at the relationships not only between each other or between person to team, but person to work, person to workload, person to work practices. And then you start to look at, well, is this actually a healthy relationship? Is it working for people? And there's various bits of theory you can use to help improve that relationship. So Lean, for example, would tell you to balance workload and capacity. If you start to get into psychological things, and Agile does, with, you know, starting with people and interactions, that's relationships again. You know, are there issues of power imbalances or of motivation that we need to be looking at? And that can be a team thing as well as an individual team. You can look at the granularity of the work. You can look at the information density of the work and how that matches up to the experience and the decision-making capacity of the person. You can look at how much ambiguity people are able to cope with or actually want. Some people want more ambiguity than others. Some people want it nailed down. Some people want more freedom. So very powerful way of looking at your organization in terms of relationships. But some of them are between people, some of them are between systems, some of them are between organizational units, and so on. And that's what that adaptive organization stuff is about. A very much deeper way of looking at. I was going to say organization, but organizing might be a better word. Finding relationships between things and looking for the relationship to benefit both sides.
So as you put a blanket over all of this, it all speaks to the same. It really does. Yeah. As a project manager, those are all points that would help me go ahead and be a better project manager by delivering the value.
So what I've tried to do over the last few years, I mean, it started really with my first book, but I've really have dug deeper and worked harder at this stuff. Is, I'm not satisfied just with saying these are the practices that you should follow. I really want to understand the theory that underpins it, and you're forced actually to integrate quite a number of different bodies of knowledge to do a good job of that. So you can look at lean, you can look at agile, and you can look at the maths that underpins those. You can look at the psychology that underpins those, and so on. There's some very interesting systems theory. There's some interesting complexity theory as well.
Yeah.
And to synthesize all of that does take a bit of work, but I believe I've got a teachable, presentable, accessible way of getting into that. And people who've read my books will know that's just what I do. I love integrating things, and I've worked very hard on that in Leading with Outcomes as well, to teach it to people.
Very good. I wanted to bring up something also for all the participants here. Mike's been very generous in offering us participants in this call today a discount, and there'll be a code associated with it to his what is the next course that you're having?
Well, Leading with Outcomes is actually available as a self-paced thing. You can just do it online.
Okay, perfect.
There are some events online. The next one, unfortunately, is going to be it's one that's in the mornings UK time, which is going to be a horrific time for you.
Yeah.
And I'm doing one in London as well, in person. My first in-person public training since COVID, so that's going to be exciting.
Yeah. You won't be doing one in Arkansas?
Well, if I'm invited. I am going to Australia and India this year, so I'm just beginning to travel again as well, which all very exciting. But yeah, you can all of this stuff from foundation onwards. You can do all four of these modules in your own time, and the feedback I'm getting on those has been great. And yeah, you're very welcome. And there's a 15% saving there if you go to that page. The link was on the screen. I thought I'd copied it. Let me put it into chat, and you can pick up all the references and information about the things I've mentioned on that page.
Yeah, it is in the chat for all of you attending here, and those that are not reading the chat, then we'll go ahead and send it to you.
You can share that out as well when
Very good.
Yes.
Okay, any other questions? Well, I tell you, I think this is really great stuff. I personally practice or do my best at practicing that. That's what I want. I'm really very, very thankful that you're sharing that with the colleagues here and everything else. And you have, it's kind of late for you there. We really appreciate it, and hope to talk to you and see you again, Mike.
That's been my pleasure. Thank you very much, actually, for the invitation. I updated the talk and actually enjoyed updating the talk. And
good.
Yes, I hope it came across well. So,
all right. Thanks again.
My pleasure.
it. Back to you, Mike. The other Mike.
If I can get off. Mike, thank you so much. Coming to us all the way from the middle of the Great Island.
It is right in the middle.
Yes. I did look it up before we got on. So yeah, and similarly, Arkansas is pretty much, we're in the middle of the United States, a little bit south. But we do have electricity and internet, and we do wear our shoes half of the year. So thanks, everybody. I will say one last thing. If you signed up for the ball game tomorrow night, you'll meet Bill at the gate as you come in. Before you get in, we filled that thing up in less than 24 hours. So thanks everybody for getting on there, registering early. Look forward to seeing you at the ballpark tomorrow. And thank you all for joining today. Thank you, Mike, for being here from all the way up across the pond. And you all have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thanks, everybody.